going to do a little demo, and then I'm going to show you something too with the bowls that I have there, shade and shadow as well, before you start painting. I'm going to do one petal at a time with this one, and we want working time. So we want to wet the area twice, and these are pretty big petals we've drawn too, so we need some working time. And I'm switched to a slightly bigger brush than I had last time because we are painting fairly large. This is, what is this? A number 6. And it is a sable brush. So sable brushes hold a little more than synthetic ones. What did I do? Oh, that's the edge of the other petal. Oops. Okay. If you want to show the edges of your petals, like here, right? You see, we really see those edges. So if I was painting this flower, I'd have to be very careful to make sure that I'm leaving a dry edge there, right? So I messed that up. So I have to let that dry. Might make sense if I painted this one that's behind this. So, and there's a little trick I should show you too, because, and we also see that this one would have been a really challenging one, so it's kind of good you didn't pick it. To keep this edge crisp, but this soft, right? How do you do that? Because you don't want your flower to look patchwork either, like stiff, right? So one of the places that helps me is the pistil here, kind of helps get past that. One of the things I'm gonna help you figure out, so that here's the edge of my petal, so I want to stop there. But down here, where I want a soft, like wherever the inside of the flower is, sometimes we don't necessarily have a hard edge. It's particularly noticeable on this one. Do you see that? How the flower petal is a hard edge, but inside they start to join up, and we don't want a hard edge there, and we don't want it to look all patchwork, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm watering past one area and leaving a gap, and I'll help you kind of figure that out. I'll show you what we can do. And then I'm drawing up to the edge of the flower petal there. It's a good idea to start with what's behind and what's darker, and maintain this edge that's going to be brighter and show up, right? So I'm going to wet this twice. If I only wet it once, I won't have enough working time, okay? And I gave you a nice heavyweight paper to use, so that's going to give you a good amount of time to work. So we allow that to soak in. So usually we want some water on the page that's soaked in to give us working time, and then some on the surface of the page. Now I see that this thing is pretty darn dark, so I want to go ahead with a really strong red kind of right away, get my main color on. So you look to see what's my main lightest color mostly, like what, so I see a lot of red in here. So I'm going to just go for it. The really strong red. And do you see what that's doing? How it's running like that? Do you see how that would have created this really beautifully? And because I had a really wet brush and a wet page, and it just runs. And I might say, you know, I love that. What if I just let it be that, and I'm going to let that dry and come back and finish it later? You could choose to do that. I'm going to choose to keep painting though. So I got my red where I want it. I need to do a little bit of finesse work over here because I don't want this to continue to be a hard edge. So I'm just going to continue to wash that away to nothing, but without getting close to the other edge. So that just, and then I'll be able to blend that in, and I won't be able to see it in the end, okay? Now, as I come around here, while that's still wet, I'm going to drop a really dark red into the middle and let that run. So I'm putting some alizarin crimson with a little bit of violet in there. And I'm gonna do a little bit of bruising, pulling that red through right away. Now with, because we're on 300-pound paper, it tends to bow just a bit, which is kind of helping me out. I'm doing the part that's at the top of the bow because it's going to dry faster. And now I'm going around as it's curling around. I have a little more drying time available to me. Now I'm coming in with the orange into here. And first, my first concern is just get the color on there while there's still some moisture on the page. And then I'm going to worry about getting the roundness to happen, like for those curls of the petals. Right? So color first. And then we do some finesse. I can see that there's some lines coming through here, so I want to get that on first while there's still enough moisture on the page. And now I want to take maybe a smaller brush and do a little bit of finesse stuff. Wow, it's amazing how fast that dried right there. I'm not happy about that. But, well, wipe on the side. And I want to create some shadowing to these folds, right? I'm going to take, now I have some cadmium red. I'm going to create a little bit of shading. So do you notice what I'm doing? I put it on, I'm saying, oh, it's too strong, wipe my brush so I can lighten it up. If you notice it looks fuzzy, wipe your brush and rub over it, and then it'll get rid of any fuzzy spreading. And you can keep painting provided there's a shine on the paper. Do you notice it dried up at the top there before the rest of this did? So I can't paint on there right now. If I really feel like I'm going to need to do that, I'll have to do it later. There's a lot of little detail in there that I don't particularly feel like doing. If you really wanted to, a skewer could do that for you. Oh, here's one. To me, that's more detail than I care to actually have in my paintings, but there's a way you could do it. I think it would look better to do bruising than it would to paint it on dry later. But if you were a particularly detail-minded person with a really fine brush, you probably could. Now, I'm going to show you another area because some of you have flowers that you might want to do some lifting out of to create these humps. I think the one that you're doing, Natasha, has quite a bit of, some of you have it where it really looks lumpy, right? So one of the things you notice I've done is I've made a lot of contrast for this petal, so it's going to look like it's in front of that one. I made it nice and dark in there. In fact, I could have made it darker still. Probably should have. So I have to let that dry before I do more there. So let's do this one. Now some of these little edges I can kind of play with fixing up later, like some of these really fine details. It's hard to get sometimes all of that in there. Now where does this one stop? It stops there. Now, of course, as you see this being done, yeah, you need to kind of make it your own. Some of you are going to be loose and playful and splash the color together, and other people are going to want to be a little more refined and careful. And so just because you see me doing it one way doesn't mean you have to emulate that exactly. Right? I'm just trying to show you some watercolor techniques. All right, so with this one, I'm definitely going to want to start with the lightest color. So last time I was doing a really dark petal. This time I'm doing a much lighter petal, right? So that's what we're looking at there. So I'm going to look for the dominant color that I see. So I think it's kind of pretty much orange. So I have a cad red orange here, or a cad orange. And I'm just going to splash that on there quick. And I can see that there's an orange underglow to a lot of it. That's why I'm going over the whole thing with it, rather than just an area. And then I'm going to want to mix another one. So now I'm taking some cad red and cad orange. I think it needs to be more. And my brush is really wet compared to my page right now, so good to have a cloth nearby. So that's something to get used to, kind of wiping off what you have. So I want to get some of the form, this soft filigree form here. You see how I'm following the shape of the petal. Quick kind of flicks of the color, and then as I run out, I'm going to put some of the color here, using the side of my brush a little bit. I want to make sure that I end up with that glow in the middle there, right? And a little more yellow coloring at the top. So I'm going to lift a little bit of this out so I have a highlight. So to lift out, pull your brush into a cloth. I'm going to pull this out a bit. Now I don't want that to be just damp though, because then I'm going to have blooming. So I'm going to add a bit of moisture back, but not too much. So don't just dip immediately, wipe first. And I'm going to add a bit of a different yellow in there, just to make it have a little bit of a different feel there. And for a little fun, put some other colors so they can kind of run together. Now, making sure it's still shiny, and now I got to get to the reds, right? And a strong red here. And you see how I'm pulling up? Oops, it dropped, so I picked that up. So with flower petals, I mean, they're soft and they're smooth, the blending is smooth. So to do all of this on a dry page is going to look kind of harsh. So, and you notice I want a thinner bit of detail here. I wiped my brush, I got a nice point on there. I'm just using the tip of the brush, nice quick flick. I want to keep it quite bright in that area. If I want to blend these areas, I can go back over and smooth that out. Now my brush is a little, not very wet, but I pick up some stronger colors so I can do a little bit more controlled shading in here around some of these shapes. So when the page has just a little bit of a sheen, that's a good time to do more controlled kind of shade and shadow. So I didn't do any bruising yet, but I probably should have. So I'm going to do a little bit here, just following the form. Should have done that a little sooner. It's a lot to try to do at once. Do you notice that? So when you do it a little bit too late, it doesn't really show up much. Do you see that? That this was better. And it helps if you pull out from the dark color into the lighter color. And what if you want to pull out some highlights? Probably use a slightly smaller brush. Clean, pull it out. Because there's a little bit of a white glow on the sides here. Maybe it got too dark on you and you want to pull up an area to give a little bit of a highlight. You see what I'm doing there? So a brush that's just damp, pull out the moisture with the Kleenex, and then kind of using what's called the heel of the brush, just wiping across it like that. There's another way we can do that too after the fact, and that's with Mr. Clean's Magic Sponge, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Magic Eraser?
Yep.
Yeah. That will also do it. So, and lifting out is done when it's not really wet. If you lift out too soon, it just runs back in. Okay? If you have light colored veins running through there and you didn't mask them off, once you see the shine is gone, you see the shine just left, this is a good time to scratch off. Oops. So that if you do have some light colored veins, scratch off once it's evaporated off where it's just sort of looking dull. Okay? And a good thing to use is a thin, crisp palette knife to do that. Okay? And I wish I hadn't scratched across. Be careful that you're following the shape. Okay? I don't think that's quite dark enough, but I've run out of time. So I'm going to leave it, and then I can always wet it again and do some more work on it. Okay? So, do you feel like you can go for it? Mm-hmm. But I wanted to show you something first, though. So there's different types of shapes to flowers. So the flower we're doing now is kind of a compound shape, isn't it? But some flowers are kind of disc-like, right? So that they maybe, let's say there is a series of petals coming in like this, right? And there's the center. So do you notice when you see the light on it, do you see what happens here that we have, let's imagine that there's petals coming like this. The tip is in the light. As it curls in, there's a little bit of shadow. The other side here is mostly light, but not a lot of shade and shadow difference on it when it's a flat kind of flower like that. There's some flowers that are, you know, the petals are falling down this way, right? So what happens there when the light's coming this way, we get highlight on this side, a little bit darker on that side. Can you see that? Okay. Relatively bright in the middle. Most flowers are going to have a dent in there too. I can't have a plate that does that. And so it would go darker inside again. The flower that we're doing, it's kind of a compound shape. I don't have a bowl that shape. What I'd need is a bowl that would go like this and then have a flared out flange here, right? So, but if we look at the middle portion of the flower we're painting, there's sort of a bowl type shape to it, right? Where this side's in shadow, this side is catching light, it's really dark inside. So, so if you look at a bowl that's just simple and doesn't have all the color and all the textures and all that a flower has, when you look at this, do you see how it's dark inside here? Light there. So the inside cup of the flower is dark on the inside, like where, and light on the other side, but the light is hitting it. All right, so if we look at Maury's here, right? We got a couple things happening. So when we first get a painting done, here's mine and Renee's. Can you see Renee's? And we got Renee's. So we take that first pass, and what's yours looking like? Can I see yours? Maybe we can bring them all over. Yours is wonderful too. So we've got this issue happening with a few of them.
Yeah.
Right? Let's see. And it didn't happen with this one, and we're going to learn why. So when we look at the intensity of color on Jennifer's and on Zoe's, right? So two very different approaches, hey? Really loose and playful, very tightly controlled, right? Their color looks fairly intense. Do you notice that? And then you look at these ones, so mine, this one, also done very wet, like Jennifer's was, right? And this one done fairly wet, but with a little more control. And what do you notice the color difference with these ones compared to these two?
Theirs are more vibrant.
Yeah. Can you guess why?
They didn't use as much water.
Nope. They're on 140 pound paper. This paper is 140 pound. So it absorbs less. And we need to be able to keep the page flat, right? So we need a block, we need it to be stretched, or we need heavy paper so it doesn't bow. Because then if we try to paint, the water's running downhill and it gets difficult. So all of the paintings that are on the 300 paper, once they're dry, they look a little dull, right? Not quite as intense as we would want. And so Maury, you said, it doesn't look dark enough, I gotta add more. And then she's added more, and it starts to look a little overworked. You start to see it's shiny sitting on the surface. There's too much now. So we have a challenge when we're using heavy paper. It's nice, I can see everybody's got nice blending, it gives you lots of time to work, and it's wonderful that way. But we end up with something that looks a little bit pale. First reason why this happens, we're on a heavyweight paper, but we're using student quality paint, right? And so it dries and you say, looks a little, that wasn't what I was hoping for. It looks much better when it was wet, right? And so we need to maybe go over that again to strengthen it up in a few places. And when you work really wet, it ends up being very soft focus. Now it might want a little more control here and there. So if you're on the heavier paper, it is true that this would look a lot more intense and wonderful if we had professional series paints. So, so if you like the convenience of not stretching paper to keep it flat, then you might want, and you might want to use heavy paper, but if you do, then you're going to want professional paint. If you say, well, I don't want to spend all that money on professional paint, you might want to spend the money on a watercolor block. They do cost more. Or take the time to stretch your paper so it stays flat. Now that we have this, we can do something to it to strengthen it up. So one of the problems with this particular paint that you have, alizarin crimson in the student quality paint is kind of weak. Traditionally, alizarin crimson is a stain. It comes from a plant source, a dye. It's normally a really strong pigment, but it's alizarin crimson hue. So when we say something's a hue, it's the color of. It's not like cadmium red deep hue. It's the color of cad red deep, but it's not actual cad red. Most cadmiums have been replaced because they're bad for you. Alizarin it's just, the real stuff's really expensive, right? So it's kind of weak.
How much
so,
do you know?
Well, I don't remember, but you can buy alizarin crimson permanent. That's the real alizarin crimson. It stains the page, it doesn't lift off, and it's really powerful color that you could have gotten a dark enough with the real alizarin, and it wouldn't look stiff and shiny sitting on top like that, okay? So sometimes it's just the quality of what we're using that's giving us problems. So, but if that happens, you say, well, I can't get my paint to go dark enough. What could you do to make it darker? Straight out of the tube's not dark enough, what do you do?
I know, with violet.
Yeah, add some violet. So that's what,
maybe.
yeah, that's what you did, right? To make yours darker, you added some violet. So that is what you'd have to do here. When you see it's not getting dark enough and it starting to sit on top,
But this has violet already.
it's more violet. Yeah. When we know that we might want to paint on top, we have to be able to know whether you can paint on top without a problem. And it depends on what approach to painting on top we're going to do, right? So what I've done here is I painted swatches of my colors on the side, and I want to test how permanent they are. And you can do this for all your colors in your kit, so you know. So if I wet on top of this, is it going to stay? That seems pretty safe. Because what if it smears and runs or lifts off? So it looks like I can wet on top of those two colors. That's good. Because you'd hate to have done all that work, wet over it, and a smear. Now this color, does it stay? Not too bad. Let's try this one. They seem to be doing okay. Now typically the colors we're using, because they're cadmiums, don't tend to stay very well. They can lift. But that seemed to have been okay. Nothing nasty. Now if I rub a lot, does it lift and move? And which ones do? So it seems like these two reds move a little, but the yellow and the orange seem to be doing okay. Look at this one. That's alizarin crimson hue, and it is moving. Real alizarin does not lift at all. Okay, so it looks like I could work on top of it and it would be safe. So if your flower dried really light and dull, and you want to have a chance to work over it and make the colors stronger and darker, or add some stronger darks, oftentimes that's what we need. So like you found, Maury, that you needed some stronger darks. I think, Renee, you need some stronger darks. Color. Maybe some brighter colors too.
On Jennifer's.
A little bit dull.
Yeah.
And so I think mine looks a little dull too. So what I can do is I can wet on top of it, and I want to make sure before, is it safe to do that? So I'm checking, and we can see that the reds do run a little. So that means, what does that tell me? Don't be rubbing all over it. Get it on there as quick as you can. And normally what we would do, if we knew we wanted to paint in layers, we would pick colors that stain the page and that I can paint on top of without a single worry. Cadmiums, the reds and oranges generally are not so good to paint on top of. And that's where using things like rose madder and permanent rose, mixing with yellows, that like aureolin or quinacridone gold, they stay on the page better. So than the cadmiums. Cadmiums tend to move a little more. So, but that is okay, and now I can decide, oh, I want to strengthen it. I can come back with some stronger reds, some darker colors, and make a stronger painting. And I can make more detail if I want in this pass, or I can make it more loose if that's what I want, or more tightly controlled depending on how I want to adapt my painting. And maybe just saying, oh, I want some stronger yellow here, I want some stronger red there. So give it, so you can, it looks like you can safely get away with doing that. As long as you're not rubbing it too hard. Right, so in this case, it's basically we just wet it again and paint it again and just strengthen up what we feel we need to. And it gives us that second chance. And that often I find when we're using heavier paper, it's common to sort of have to paint it twice, especially if you have student quality paint as opposed to professional paint. So that's one approach, and I would take some more time to do that and make sure I've got some stronger darks. Now I notice that there's other ways you can do touch-up without having to wet the whole thing, especially if you're just looking to do a little bit here and there. So I want to show you what you can do with that too. So I would do more, but I'm not going to because you're not here to just stand here and watch me paint. So, but it definitely needs some stronger dark. Like look in here, I really need that to be much darker, right? And give it a little more shape. And I think some of my areas need a bit brighter yellow on them too. So I want to touch it up. So probably for me, I do want to go over it, but there's other things you can do. And I noticed that that was something that Jennifer was doing. And you had a good idea of how you did it too. So what she had done, so she noticed on her flower there is these sort of slightly curled edges that were casting shadows, right? And kind of giving some dark edges here and there, like just here. So what was nice about what you did, Jennifer, you painted all the way out to the edge with the brighter color, let it dry, and then came next to it, left this, like when it was dry, and painted the shadow. So she got that sense of the curl to the petal there. And I was watching her do it, and what you were doing is something I would have done too. So what she did, so let's say, let me see, where's my picture? What do I need to do? I've got a different picture than her, but let's say I want to add a dark area. So I guess I'll pretend I have a curl like you did. So let's say I want to make a little curl here. So what she did is she painted some clean water where she wanted it. And then she picked I need a smaller brush. I lost my brush. Let's grab another one. There it is. Okay. And then she took her darker color she wanted. So you should come around and find some strength beside the petals, like to find the edges of the petals, right? Once you've found your strength, that we might, to just beef it up a bit, I'm going to show you how you can lift out. So there's things called, we can use the Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, and then there's this thing called the Incredible Nib. So, but right now our issue is more having the strength, the darkness that we need, right? So don't worry if you're missing a highlight. There are ways to pull it out, okay? So we'll do kind of one thing at a time, right? So make sure you get some like cadmium red deep, alizarin crimson, and some violet added in to find some stronger darks. If you notice your painting looks a little dull, you might put a wash of some yellow on top in a few spots to give it a little more glow and intensity. So when you're adding, you want to use that clean water to blend away what you added so it doesn't seem stiff and stuck on top. So you can get it to blend in.